Thank you, everyone, and welcome to session 3 of this conference. I am sure that the first 2 sessions have been worth your while, and I hope that this next session will also be something that you cherish in terms of the topics we are going to cover and the presenters. We are going to look at 3 papers from very well-known academics and upcoming academics. A little bit of housekeeping. Each paper is going to be in 3 parts. The first 20 minutes, we are going to listen to the presenters, and we are not going to take questions. The next 5 minutes will take the discussion of the paper, which will enrich our knowledge in terms of what has been presented. And then we open the floor. The last 5 minutes, we open the floor for questions. The first presenter is one of our colleagues at SOAS, an upcoming guru in finance. He just completed his PhD, and it is currently working with SOAS. I'm sure by the end of the presentation, you will see the stuff Dr. Jeffrey is made of. He's going to present the paper on sovereign risk and China's overseas infrastructure investment, evidence from developing countries. And this paper, I believe, is co-authored by Ongbo and Victor Murinde. Jeffrey is not with us today, but he is also with us because he will be presenting online. Can we welcome Jeffrey, please?
Thank you. Sorry I could not join you in person today, so due to unforeseen circumstances. I'm really sorry about that. And as if that wasn't enough, we have been working in the background trying to fix my Zoom connection, but the sharing system has not worked. So we agreed that Aweng is going to be sharing while I present. Like the chair said, my name is Jeffrey Ighedosa. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Global Finance here at SOAS. This is a joint paper with Professor Ongbo and Professor Victor Murinde. In this paper, we investigate the effects of sovereign risk on Chinese overseas infrastructure investment. This study focuses on developing countries, and it is a work in progress. And this result that we are about to share today are the first set of results that we have. So any comments that we can get at this stage of the study would certainly help us to improve the paper. Aweng, let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. The study is motivated by the recent drop in Chinese overseas investment. Unlike the trends we observed before the outbreak of COVID-19, with growing trend in some countries and relatively stable investment flows in other countries, the post-COVID period has seen significant reduction in investment across all regions. The graph on the screen is based on the Belt and Road Initiative because most of the foreign direct investment from China has been under the umbrella of this initiative since 2013. The graph clearly shows that investment level has fallen since 2020. But before this recent reduction, the cumulative value of Chinese foreign investment nearly tripled between 2014 and 2021, according to this IMF report where this information was pulled from. This is because more and more countries have signed agreement with China under the Belt and Road Initiative since it was first launched in 2013. Majority of these countries are developing countries with significant infrastructure gaps. When they approach China for investment, they know that Chinese investment specifically target infrastructure projects that can help them to drive their economy. Moreover, China itself is a testament to the effectiveness of this approach with what they have done with their economy. Therefore, these countries are eager, especially the developing countries, to participate in this initiative and try to replicate this investment model in their local economy. So it is not surprising that what we have here is over 150 countries that have already signed investment agreement with China. In terms of report, a lot has been said and written about Chinese investment in developing countries. Some critics argue that Chinese investment may lead to debt trap diplomacy. However, no evidence of debt trap has actually been reported in the literature. Well, I haven't seen one, and especially in Africa, where the focus has been. Moreover, the infrastructure investment are usually initiated by the recipient countries rather than China. So the motive is on the recipient government side. Developing countries seek this investment because of low cost involved for development too. This study by Atkins, that is on this slide, examines the agreements signed by several host country governments before Chinese investment activities officially started in their countries. And it shows that agreements contain little or no initial cost. And there are no provisions that would increase Chinese influence over these states. And very few or no obligations are created for the participating countries as well as China. These agreements, well, in terms of cost, these are good for the countries, especially the smaller countries that will struggle to secure investment from other sources. But what is not so good is that some of these investment promises may end up not being delivered since there are no obligations to do so. Okay, Awen, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, here we look at the theoretical arguments on the determinants of foreign direct investment, or FDI, to try and understand the factors that result in higher or lower Chinese investment. We start with the standard theory of FDI, which explains the location aspect of foreign investments. It shows that investors are likely to choose investment locations that minimize their cost and also select projects that are in line with their overall objectives, meaning that determinants of FDI are motive-based. And the three primary motivations discussed in this literature are market-seeking motive, resource-seeking motive, and efficiency-seeking motive. For the market-seeking motive, foreign investors are simply attracted to the size of the market, especially growing markets with opportunities for expansion, and wealth creation. This may also be due to where they can have access to a distribution network so that they're able to facilitate export of domestic products as well as to import from the host countries. Resource-seeking foreign investors are interested in securing the supply of raw materials that are in short supply at home. So this means they are likely to go to countries with natural resources such as minerals and petroleum or agricultural products. For efficiency-seeking investors, they are looking for opportunity to lower cost of operations, which means they are likely to invest in countries with lower labor costs than what they are paying at home. Now, these arguments are within the standard theory of FDI. In terms of applying this theory to Chinese investment, it's a little bit problematic because these arguments are designed for foreign investors from advanced countries that are investing in developing countries because they want to take advantage of their market imperfections to generate higher returns or reduce cost. But you have China itself is an emerging market with some of these imperfections. So to address this issue, this study by Berkeley and well, they title it Special Theory for Emerging Economy. You know, their argument is that if an emerging economy has a policy that encourages overseas investment, its imperfections can provide the opportunities for home countries to invest abroad. So when they apply this argument to Chinese investment with evidence, it shows that the government support in China and capital market imperfections, such as access to capital at below market rates, can make it easier for Chinese firms to achieve their resource-seeking or market-seeking motives abroad. So in this sense, what they are actually saying is that market imperfections in developing countries or emerging economies can, in this sense, be the opportunities for local firms to invest abroad. And the empirical literature seems to support this. And can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, the empirical literature on China's, these papers are not the general literature. These papers specifically focus on Chinese investment. And the evidence appears to be consistent with the theoretical predictions that we just covered within the standard FDI theory. The evidence support the market-seeking argument, which means Chinese investors are attracted to the size of market. It also supports the resource-seeking motive, meaning that countries with natural resources are more likely to receive investment from China than those without natural resources. Efficiency, meanwhile, we have not come across evidence of efficiency-seeking motive, which suggests that seeking low labor cost abroad is not an important determinant. This could be because labor cost is not too high at home, in this case, China, to go abroad as you would see in advanced countries, FDI. The evidence on the institutional quality of the host country is very mixed. We have studies which support positive effect of higher institutional quality on Chinese investment. We have negative effect as well as those that show that investment is unaffected by the host country institutional quality. So we believe this is because context matter, which is one of the things that Berkeley was talking about when it comes to emerging market, in explaining nations' inflow and outflow of investment, especially when it comes to institutional quality and how they interact with other key variables. If you check this literature, for example, natural resources is one of the most important factors in this literature. So if you then have a country with higher natural resources, then the quality of institutions becomes irrelevant, because whether it's good or bad, investors in this case will go for a country with natural resources. Owen, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. We strongly believe that Chinese investors have become more sensitive to risk since COVID-19, which has contributed to the reduction in the overall investment that we see in the first slide. Higher public debt to GDP ratios have increased sovereign risk across developing countries. And we know that when sovereign rating falls, foreign investment falls as well. We also believe that risk has become an important determinant of Chinese overseas investment in the post-pandemic period due to the growing number of troubled Chinese investments. Reports show that the percentage of troubled investment is around 10 to 11% across all over 150 countries. But this is as high as 30% in some countries. It looks like there has been a policy change to improve the quality of investment. And this makes sovereign risk a lot more important to China than firm level risk due to the government-to-government relationship that is required in the way that China invests. So based on this argument, we test the hypothesis that countries with higher sovereign risk have received less China's infrastructure investment than countries with lower sovereign risk since COVID-19 pandemic. Can we go to the next slide, please? So to test our argument, our dependent variable is the China's overseas infrastructure investment, OII. I've heard this mentioned before today, so we're using the same measure, OII. We obtain OII data from the China Global Investment Tracker. Then the primary independent variable is sovereign risk, which is measured as the 10-year government bond yields of the host countries. And the data for this come from DataStream. This measure is very popular in the literature because it reflects the market view, therefore more likely to react more quickly to changes in relevant information. In terms of the sample, the study is based on 65 countries that are classified as low or middle income by the World Bank. And the period that we have covered is 2013 to 2023. At the start, we had the data for all the countries that have received investment from China during the sample period, which were over 100. However, with the 10-year bond yield, there is limited data availability. So 65 is the maximum number that we could work with. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we include a number of control variables in the study. The real GDP growth is included for the market-seeking motive of Chinese investors. Natural resources rent to GDP for resource-seeking motive. Then there's institutional quality, which is the average of the 6 governance indicators, which include political stability, control of corruption, rule of law, voice and accountability, government effectiveness, and absence of violence. Local infrastructure is also included, trade openness, exchange rate, government expenditure, and tax revenue. We obtained the data for the control variables from the World Bank Development Indicators database. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the summary of data. For the key variables, the average overseas infrastructure investment from China is just over $9 million. And the average of the independent variable, the sovereign risk, is 8.29. I have highlighted the average of the troubled Chinese investment, which is 13%, which is just slightly above the average of 10 to 11% reported in all the countries within the China Global Investment Tracker. The graph shows the side shows the average annual Chinese investment for the sample countries and period. We can clearly see the huge drop in Chinese overseas investment in 2020, which seemed to have not recovered at the end of 2023. I mean, these data information, they're all in line with our argument. And can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we specify this difference in differences model, where OII is the log of China's overseas investment. Then treated has a value of 1 if a country's sovereign risk in 2019 is below the median value of the sovereign risk distribution. Post is assigned 1 for year 2020, 21, 22, and 23. Then X contains the control variables that I discussed earlier, while the lambda and F are time and country fixed effects respectively. What we have done here in terms of estimation is comparing the difference in Chinese investment between low sovereign risk countries and high sovereign risk countries after the outbreak of COVID-19 with their pre-COVID levels. So beta in this case in the equation captures that treatment effect, which we're interested in. If it is greater than 0, it means that countries in the treated group have received more investment from China since COVID-19 than those in the control group. And that will confirm our argument. And can we go to the next slide? Okay, this table presents the baseline results. The first variable here is for the treatment effect, which appears positive and significant at the 1% level. This suggests that countries in our treated group, which are those with...
Dr. Jeffrey.
Yep.
Can you round up in the next 1 to 2 minutes, please?
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, this the treatment effect suggests that countries in the treatment group have received higher investment than those in the lower group. Also the result for the post shows that although that is the case, but in the post-pandemic period, Chinese investment has fallen overall. And for the control variables that we have added, only natural resources, institutional quality, and local infrastructure are important. The rest are not significant. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, in this table, what we've done here, we wanted to account for financial development in the country as well as government expenditure. We discovered that the financial development is important. Non-performing loan is not important. Then in the last column, which is 3, tax revenue is important and negative, which means a tax system, higher tax system does not attract much FDI. I want the next slide, please. Okay, so here we directly test the effect of sovereign risk on problem investment, because we know now that investment has reduced. So we want to know why sovereign risk is important. So here we discover that because it increases the proportion of problem investment for China. That's why it's positive and significant. That is the key variable in that table. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, this is now what we've done here is that because the overseas investment has fallen, so we explore the margins. China may simply reduce the number of investment in countries with higher sovereign risk without the size of average investment being affected. To check this argument, we look at both the extensive and intensive margins. The extensive margin is the log of the number of new investment in the country, while the intensive margin is the log of the aggregate divided by the number of new investment.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. I think I have to stop you here because we are already running out of time. I think we all get the gist of the presentation. Now, I want to, if there's any other information you want to give us, you should have the opportunity during the question and answer session. Now, let me have the privilege to introduce Dr. Yang, who was formerly a colleague at SOAS and is now with the University of Sheffield. Dr. Wang is going to discuss the paper, and I'm sure we are going to get a lot of insight.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to invite me to this conference. I think I've done a lot of things, I think, from today mornings, from a panelist, also from a keynote speaker, a lot of insights, information about this interesting African and China infrastructure investment thing. Regarding to the paper, sorry, I think I didn't include the victor's name because when I was informed, I think that it's only Jeffrey and Hong's paper. But I think I've been reading this paper, and there's a lot insights from this paper. So I tried to summarize as brief as possible. Since the Jeffrey have not finished the paper, presenting the paper result yet. So overall, I think the paper was finding the country with higher sovereign risk experience greater decrease in China's overseas infrastructure investment compared to those with low sovereign risk following the COVID-19 pandemic. And the funding also suggests this reduction is not only for the number of the new investment in the paper referring to extensive margin, and also the average size of each new investment in the paper was referred to the intensive margin. I think also the paper was suggests there's a higher sovereign risk is a positive associated with the higher ratio of the trouble or non-performing investment. So the strength of the paper, I think using the DID is the way to address also the propensity matching method to addressing this causal effect of the sovereign risk on the Chinese overseas infrastructure and try to mitigating potential confounder and provide more better reliable estimation. And also, I think this paper is somehow is timely and also have a lot of implications. So it addresses the effect of COVID-19 the global crisis, how they can affect the dynamic of foreign investment, particularly when in the morning we talk about the geopolitical sensitive framework like China Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, so I think there's a lot of things you can learn from this paper. I have just a few comments to improve this paper, given this still quite preliminary paper. So one thing is about, I would like to comment is about the DID, the framework. I think it's interesting, the paper using the DID to address a potential endogenous problem. But there's a few issues about this framework. The first, I think the paper, they are define the treatment group and control group based on the sovereign risk, based on cutting of the 2019, the median value is I don't know it's like how variation it is. So it's like the lower one and compared to higher one, what a difference, how much difference between these two groups, and I think this will be provide more detailed information about the treatment group and because important assumption there's the change between treat group and the control group. There's not the change will be not change. There will be not have any effect absence of this COVID shock. So I think it's a very important consumption when the DID framework working. And also I think define as a below, I was thinking would be better defined as a above. I think will be easy to interpret because the paper was talking about when there's a lower risk, okay, then they are more likely to have more infrastructure investment. However, because generally trend is dropping, so I think from the audience point of view, it's much easier to understand, to knowing because you're seeing this, this higher sovereign risk can somehow reducing less compared to more higher sovereign risk a country. Another thing is about this treatment and the post, because this framework specification was using a general DID. So I don't see this post and treat should be presenting to be showing in the regression because they should be the absorb because they are multi-correlating problem with this time dummy and the country dummy. And another thing about the key variable here, sovereign risk. I think this paper was using 10 years government bond years. I think our thinking probably can be better to provide some robustness tests, like credit rating things about a country. I think will be somehow more intuitive, or because this sovereign risk also including the political like instability things. So it's possible. Maybe I think it's provide more robustness tests to be able to give more convincing result. And parallel trend, I think, is another very important, as one mentioned, is a very important thing to produce the value causal estimation. So I think the parallel trend, I think they only showing some graph change between the treatment group and control group. I think it would be better to use an event study to show this statistic difference before and after the COVID. And I think another few things is that control variable. I think there's a lot of control variable here, but I think the control variable sometimes can be very bad things because the COVID can somehow affecting the control variable. So in the econometrics, we call the bad control here. So your COVID can affect many things in the control variable in the regression. Another thing about the control variable, I think you see the one control variable called the institutional quality, I think it's a negative. It was saying they are just suggesting there's a higher government is associated with a lower investment. However, this variable is also, I see from the correlation matrix is negative associated with sovereign risk. So I think it somehow contradict because you see the sovereign risk can be reducing, higher sovereign risk can be reducing the investment, and you see higher lower government institution level can can increasing the investment. So somehow is something contradict here. So I think the last one probably I think it would be better to provide more motivation at the beginning, see why they want to study. You know, I think this introduction is talk about the debt trap or the different other things, but I think talk about more linked to the research, the COVID-19, and also the sovereign risk will be better to provide the motivation why I want to do this research. But I think this great paper, there's a lot of things we can learn from here, and I probably there's a lot of robustity tests here, so and we interesting a lot of application we can.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. I'm sure Dr. Jeffrey will be in contact with you in order to improve the paper. Thank you. Yes, the floor is now open. I'm going to take, because we are running out of time, I'm going to take 2 questions, and then we have responses from the author as well as the co-authors. I'm going to take 1 female and 1 male. Okay, and then you, yeah.
Okay, I'll start off because when we talk about the foreign direct investment theory, and especially Downing's theory to put into this paper, my question is like, you know, how applicable, to be honest, about this particular motivation explanation in this context of research. The reason why I said is because the FDI, Downing's paradigm is a very general, broad question. And then it can be applied in a particular location choice. And it also looking into the different sectors as well of their investment. So in this particular paper, when we're looking into Chinese overseas infrastructure investment, then I think, you know, as a comment, it will be good to actually try to clarify and then to make the argument much stronger why this particular theoretical perspective is relevant and also important here.
Yes, thank you. So yours is a comment, not a question.
Oh, can I reflect on that?
Okay.
Yeah, my question is number 1, in terms of variables, the credit rating action has not been factored in terms of understanding the pattern of sovereign risk, because Chinese investments has also been immune to rating action or rating based understanding of the risk perceptions, sovereign risk perceptions. Post pandemic, anecdotally talking, Ethiopia was downgraded, and Ethiopian investments, as the other researcher was pointing out in the other day, that has gone down from the Chinese perspective. Has China become sensitive towards the sovereign rating now post pandemic? And also, second question is quantitatively. I think when the time frame post pandemic on the recovery of the investment has been considered risk sensitive right now. I think we need to see a larger pattern, because 2020 is when the world opened up, but China opened up in 2022 because China was closed down for 2021 as well. So that has to be factored as well in terms. And then after that, a geopolitical environment of war on Ukraine and other things have also developed, which has led to a lot of tariffs imposition by the Biden regime in China, which also is a factor. These are qualitative factors which need to be focused to argue that the investments are not going just because of risk, but also the external environmental factors have to be focused as well. So yeah, these are my 2 feedback.
Yes, thank you. I think you raised a very good question, and I'm sure Jeffrey will be able to respond to this, especially the second aspect of your question. Jeffrey? Jeffrey? Jeffrey?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, can I just say thank you to the discussant for the points he raised. I'm very happy with everything that he has said, and I've made notes of them. So I will get in touch with him to get his slides to update the paper. And the question regarding the clarity of the use of theory, I Yes, she said that was a comment, and I will update that. So the question on whether China has become more risk averse, I don't know if I missed that. Was that a question in terms of sovereign risk, right?
Yeah, in addition to that, he also raised the issue of expanding the sample period. Because as it is now, your sample period covered up to 2023.
Yes.
His position is that China opened around 2021-22, so
yes.
your sample period is not large enough to capture what you actually want to capture.
Okay. Yeah, these two questions, because according to what the results are showing regarding the risk averse, yes, it's showing that sovereign risk has become a factor since COVID, because the robustness side of the analysis that I was not able to share because I ran out of time, I clearly demonstrate there that where I did this mean test analysis that based on the outcome variable, that these two groups were identical before COVID. Then the difference we observe, in this case, the treatment effect, is in the post-COVID period. So that happens to be the case. And thank God he mentioned something about Ethiopia, that for some reasons their ratings fall and investment has fallen. And that is in line with what we are finding, that sovereign risk has become a factor for China. And that has to do with either a change of policy or and that's why we have related our analysis with the level of troubled investment, because you know it's about quality, and we also estimate there that sovereign risk is associated with higher proportion of troubled investment. So you can work out the risk channel here. That is yes. So I confirm what you said. Then regarding the sample period, okay. Because I've only just been, I went on that website yesterday. I realized that the data for 2024 is actually released. So I will be able to extend the period. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. Let me use my privilege to also ask a question in terms of your control variable. I missed the control variable aspect, but I'm not sure if you control for corruption. Because
yes.
Did you control for corruption?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey, if you did that. Yeah. Can we appreciate Jeffrey? This is going to be another interesting presentation, especially if you look at the title, Feet of Clay. I wonder what that means. The past and future of China's infrastructure finance in Africa. Dr. Yunnan Chen from ODI.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for having me again. And I'm really pleased to be on this panel. Before I begin my presentation, I want to give a little bit of context and to credit also my co-authors and collaborators on this project. This paper began out of an earlier project by my collaborators Vivian Foster and Rumin Islam, who were both at the World Bank. And because of various scheduling and geographic challenges, are unable to be here. So I am presenting on their behalf, as well as on behalf of my collaborator Linda Calabresi as well, who is also a part of this project. This is a paper that is also a work in progress. It's a little bit different from, I think, some of the other presentations you'll hear today. It is not a quantitative research paper, but it is trying to target a policy audience and to distill policy messages based on the empirical data and evidence, including research that's been done by some of you out here. So the key motivations of the paper are such. First, that we all know that China has been a a significant contributor to infrastructure finance in Africa. This is one that's in flux and it's changing over time. It's also been quite controversial and attracted a lot of criticism in places. And it's also taking place in a context where we are seeing increasing competition and new entrants into the sector in the form of the US and the EU, in the form of the Global Gateway and G7 infrastructure partnerships. So this paper draws from empirical research, a literature review, and focuses on evidence from 5 countries, Angola, Ethiopia, Guinea, Kenya, and Zambia. And synthesizes some of the trends in the sector, in China's overseas financing, how it's changed, and to understand, based on some of this evidence, what are the developmental impacts and what have been the key policy challenges. And so the sort of last part of this paper will go into what we see as some of the major policy challenges from infrastructure finance, and draw some lessons from that. All right, firstly, getting into the trends in infrastructure financing. So drawing on data from the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, we can see that China is not the sole nor even the largest financier of infrastructure. The largest financier is actually from African governments themselves. But as a sole financier and as a single sole country financier, it has been the largest for most of the previous decade in this data set coming up to 2020. Over this time, China, which you can see in blue here, has amounted to around 18% of total infrastructure financing from all parties, in certain years even overtaking the ICA consortium countries themselves. And you know, as we've discussed, there are many drivers for this cycle, a lot of it coming from domestic economic factors, saturated infrastructure markets at home that push companies to go out, and African markets also becoming increasingly important, important markets for Chinese contractors and suppliers. And there are several distinct characteristics to Chinese financing in these sectors. One element that we look at is this use of framework agreements in certain countries, particularly in Angola and Ethiopia. The role of contractors and firms in playing a political entrepreneurship role as well, in incepting new projects, in brokering relationships with governments, and in brokering financing from Chinese banks. And also in the distinct use of resources as a means of collateralizing and securing both debt investments in the case of Angola's framework agreements, and also via investment models such as in Guinea, where infrastructure finance has been supported through the revenues from mining. And overall, the picture is one of a focus on hard infrastructure sectors, very much dominated in transport and energy. We have also seen a declining support in overall, in infrastructure and in China's overall financing, as we've discussed. Left is data from Boston University that shows also by sector this overall decline. As mentioned in the panel this morning, you know, there's really a squeeze after 2017, 2018, and really this comes from growing regulatory pressures domestically within China, new regulations specifically on the policy banks after 2017 from the People's Bank of China. And the impact of COVID was sort of a nail in the coffin that put additional fiscal pressures as well on African governments in their ability to take out new loans, as well as new pressures in repaying existing loans. We've also seen this kind of narrative shift as well, with this growing emphasis on a green BRI, shift to small and beautiful projects, and empirically we find that tracks, that the average size of projects, as seen on the right, it declines pretty much in every sector over time, and I think this reflects as well the greater risk aversion from Chinese financiers in these sectors. 2023 is a little bit of an exception where you see an uptick, and that reflects a small number of high-value projects in a year of overall very few projects. The overall number of projects committed, as you can see in the dotted line, has not recovered. So the second part of the paper delves into 4 sector case studies, and we choose 4 to look at as they reflect certain aspects of China's domestic interests as well as their overseas areas of dominance. And we look at hydropower, railway, digital, and renewable energy. The sector case studies go into the major trends in financing, as well as the developmental impacts as we see it. These reflect sort of 2 types, let's say, of infrastructure finance. So hydropower and railway we label as the sort of the classic era of China's infrastructure finance. There's really a boom in the early 2010s, and whilst it declines, it doesn't fully disappear. These are the sectors that comprise some of the highest value infrastructure projects that we've seen, and they're sectors that represent sectors of China's own industrial dominance, where this global boom in construction also follows a domestic boom in these sectors and their expansion. So these are sectors that China has been, quote unquote, good at, but also sectors that are pushed out because of this process of saturation at home. They're also distinct in that they're sectors that have seen less competition from traditional donors and MDBs, which really pulled back after the 1990s from hydropower, from railway, from these kinds of high-risk, big mega projects. And then looking at renewables and digital, we choose these case studies as cases of emerging sectors. They're ones that we think reflect the current and future areas of China's industrial dominance. And whilst they've been a part of overall trends, they've also seen a new boost from policy signals in recent years. There was the announcement of the Digital Silk Road after 2015 and growing efforts at cooperation in digital areas with African countries, the Green BRI in the last 5 years, and also at FOCAC last week, we also saw new announced plans around digital cooperation and the pledge of 30 new green cooperation projects as part of the action plan. So turning first to hydropower, this is an area where China has made a significant contribution to African energy generation. On the right, you see the overall contribution of Chinese financing as part of the overall picture. In red, the Chinese finance capacity. And so between 2009 and 2020, China has contributed to financing around 9.2 gigawatts of hydropower energy in Africa. Some of the largest projects in these sectors include the 1,250 megawatt dam in Sudan, the Merowe Dam. And it's a sector that's remained largely quite consistent over time. There has been very tangible impacts for energy generation based on our empirical cases. So, for example, in Ethiopia, Chinese dams account for 20% of installed generation capacity. The commissioning of the Gilbel-Gibe 3 in 2016 led to a 30% surge in energy generation. In Guinea, the commissioning of the Kareta Dam led to a 40% expansion of the country's electricity generation and led to decreased power outages. However, there's also quite a number of challenges common across these cases, and these include issues around environmental and social impacts, issues around displacement of local communities, and resettlement issues as well. And also around that, issues around compliance with ESIAs or the conducting of environmental and social impact assessments. There are also various coordination issues that emerge in the hydropower sector in delays around transmission lines and connecting new projects to the grid. In Ethiopia, the Gilgel-Gibe had issues with voltage and compatibility. And another challenge that we identify is that of revenue generation across these power projects, that the cost of electricity in several cases in the terms of the power purchase agreements that were negotiated end up being far more costly than the retail price of electricity in the market. And so in several cases, the utility ends up buying the electricity at a loss. In railway, China has also been a extremely dominant financier in the last decade, with around 14 billion of cumulative funding from 2000 to the year 2020. In practical terms, it supported the construction or improvement of around 5,500 kilometers of railway line. And a lot of these have been greenfield projects. They are newly built standard gauge railway, and part of China's own railway development strategies at home, which translated into what was called an export supply chain strategy overseas. And these railways have contributed, we argue, to national and regional connectivity plans. In the case of Angola, the Benguela Railway connects the Congolese railway network to DRC and connects Zambia to the port. Kenya's standard gauge railway was constructed as originally part of an East African Railway Master Plan. And Ethiopia's SGR as well was one part of a larger railway network that was going to support the country's growth and transformation plan and its industrial strategy of export-led growth. And this has been a distinct model where Chinese firms were responsible for constructing these projects. However, in almost all of these cases, they also oversaw in taking over the operations and management of these projects, requiring them to train, to support capacity building of local workers, and so engaging in some technology transfers as well. But again, in the challenges, there have been several common themes around land displacement issues, construction delays, as well as coordination of energy supply in the case of the Ethiopian SGR. Again, over-optimistic estimations of revenue generation in many cases, where the demand for freight that was the rationale for these railways never ended up materializing, even if passenger services were taken up and successful. And all of these means that these railway projects still end up requiring fiscal subsidies from the state. Ethiopia's SGR as well, in a slightly more distinct case, was also beset by other kinds of political and social challenges in the wake of the Ethiopian civil war. And all of these have strongly contributed to debt repayment issues across several of these cases. In Ethiopia's case, it did obtain a restructuring of its railway loans in 2018. However, others such as Kenya have been less successful in this. And then turning to the emerging sectors of infrastructure finance, we look at cases from digital communications and from renewables. These are sectors in which I think we reflect a newer form of engagement from Chinese financing and potentially from Chinese contractors, but also still reflect a lot of similar challenges in terms of the implementation of infrastructure and some of the development impacts that we've seen. So firstly, ICT was the sector that received the third highest volume of loan commitments following energy and transport. This constitutes nearly $14 billion over a 20-year period, or 8% of total lending. And whilst it's not an emerging sector, we see I think a new policy emphasis on digital communications, focusing on infrastructure, but also in terms of other forms of cooperation in trade and e-commerce with China. And ICT has been distinct also in the role of contractors in orange here, who've been also quite prominent providers of financing for infrastructure construction, particularly Huawei and ZTE. And whilst a lot of this was focused on network infrastructure, in fiber optics, e-government, we're also seeing new interests in shifting to financing infrastructure like data centers. And in terms of the developmental impacts, we identify several. First, that they have contributed to broader expansion of internet access. So in the case of Kenya, for example, whilst China is not the sole causal factor in this, China's investment in the sector has contributed to broadband expansion in Kenya, which saw the increase of internet users from less than 1% of the population in 2000 to 40% in 2022. Chinese contractors have also been involved in other kinds of technology transfer initiatives and capacity building in the cases of Huawei and ZTE as part of their training centers, which began as CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives. But in ICT, I think we see similar issues around pricing as we do in energy, where a lot of the developmental benefits of these infrastructures depend on their uptake and how much they cost for users. And so despite heavy investment in Ethiopia, despite the support of ZTE in the sector, telecoms in Ethiopia still remains quite dominated by the state monopoly, despite attempts to liberalize the sector. And so without liberalization, we argue that there's still less incentive to keep costs low and quality high for public users. And finally, renewable energy is one frontier sector that's seen huge prominence in China's national industrial strategy. It's a huge area of overcapacity, particularly in the case of solar panels. And this is likely to be a significant area of expansion in future cooperation. To date, this is a sector that's seen quite limited financing from Chinese FIs, financial institutions, although we've seen a slightly more prominent role from commercial banks in supporting renewable energy expansion. And it's also a potential sector for private investment to be involved via independent power producer schemes. Looking at previous cases in the renewable sector, we also do identify clear developmental impacts in forms of energy generation. In the case of Kenya, the Garissa solar project contributed nearly 50 megawatts to the national grid. And this went way beyond the rural beneficiaries that it was originally intended for. Likewise, in Ethiopia, the Adama 1 and 2 wind projects added a combined 200 megawatts of energy to the power grid, and also generated significant local employment as well in the construction process. In terms of challenges, however, we do see similar themes around issues of ESG, around project planning and coordination. This include tensions as well with the local community during project construction. And again, the cost of energy very much depends on the local frameworks in place and the price set by the utility via the off-taker agreement. To try and summarize, I know I'm running out of time, to try and summarize very quickly. So the main sort of take-home points are that Chinese infrastructure finance has brought clear, tangible benefits in the physical expansion of infrastructure in terms of energy access, in broadening railway networks across Africa, and also in some limited elements of technology transfer as part of these project construction and implementation. However, we also identify a set of overlapping themes of challenges and weaknesses in their implementation, which have contributed to bigger macroeconomic issues, most saliently that of debt repayment and debt management. Projects did not have the intended developmental impact in some cases in stimulating exports or in raising revenues. And this in turn contributes to these debt repayment issues. I see that I am running out of time. However, I think we do see some differences between sectors where, when it comes to these newer frontier sectors in renewable and ICT, where you have more private sector participation, this may be a less salient risk. Okay, so to summarize, what we identify as sort of the key policy messages that come out of this come in the following. The challenges of these infrastructure projects are not necessarily unique to Chinese financing. They are very much embedded in the domestic institutions and governance of infrastructure construction, issues around planning and coordination, as well as the technical capacity of government agencies to manage them, in monitoring and oversight of including around issues of ESG as well. There are certain distinct aspects of Chinese financing that maybe intensify some of these challenges, and some of these include the tendency to lend to parastatals, which has contributed to issues around what's being called hidden debts, the lack of competitive procurement when projects come through unsolicited bids, and a weaker emphasis by Chinese contractors and lack of monitoring from Chinese financiers when it comes to environmental and social impact assessments and in monitoring of ESG impacts. So these are the policy lessons that we want to distill in this paper, both for governments and for financiers, both Chinese and non-Chinese, that try and address some of these issues. Around solid macro, so to briefly discuss macroeconomic management as a foundation, and ensuring debt sustainability as a foundation for governments, but also in ensuring that projects align with development plans and strategies, improving regulatory frameworks and monitoring, governance of parastatals and borrowing entities, and for financiers, ensuring that projects align with domestic plans, and better as well independent assessment before you commit to providing financing. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Now we are going to have a discussion session from Dr. Altunbas. For those of us with accounting and finance background, I am sure you have come across Professor Altunbas before. You've read a lot of articles authored by Professor. In fact, when I was writing my PhD, I did a lot of searches, and I came across topics relating to accounting. So it's not just a professor of finance, he's a professor of accounting, professor of management, and I'm sure we are going to gain a lot from Professor. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the very interesting, very work in progress papers. It's the in order to reduce the time, I am as the Yunnan did very well. I'm not going to go through this early stage of my presentation, but I'm gonna go to start. I mean, you did it very good job, excellent in to summarizing all the research what she's doing and what the colleagues are doing. It's overall, it's a review paper at the moment, and very descriptive and very compile lots of information put together. It's a very, very tough job, challenging to bring up to the paper in this level. There are some other things which you can or your co-authors consider, but what I am gonna go talk for a few minutes, and then is also luckily is the challenges of this morning as well. It's what China doing in Africa, how they contributing, and especially one of the colleagues mentioned about the cost of capital, that might be different. So my discussion is going to be in that direction, because what I did last night is I'm not complaining, but I received the letter paper is very late yesterday afternoon, and so is the what I did this last evening, yesterday evening. We were working on these areas, something similar, especially syndicated loan market, where you can find the detailed information about the financing. Really detailed information. So I know that it's always interest of these topics. So I borrowed use the PhD students' data coming from the icon, and it's the period of this is individual contract, which is the period 2002 to 2020, which is very good. More or less your papers that you focusing on in the similar period. It's what I want to see and to understanding relationship between the loan spread and large Chinese investment, which I borrowed date from your papers, and as well as some other things. That's I could have done better job, but it's something like some date that is used as a proxy years 2009-12, especially is China really stepped in, invested in the Africa as well as the other emerging markets. Then there is a period also 2016-17 period. There is again different way they have invested. So I took the opportunity. These are the shock period of those years is a shock. Might be then to see the spread. What is how the syndicated loan spread impacted? So is I took to the data set is very global one, but I particularly look at the emerging one. Emerging is mainly Africa, but a few other countries, because I didn't have the time to be separated. But we can take it as the general in more in Africa. Then I also to see the interaction, to see what happened. So it's from the data is try to put the pictures. These are the loan spread, all in drawn cost of the cost. It's a spread of the large syndicated loans. So if emerging markets and advanced economies, seems to be quite different. And then it's so that give me understanding what's happened, how China or especially Chinese aids or financing infrastructure impact on the emerging market or impact on the Africa. I believe they might have give a reduced uncertainty, give the opportunity to tap in market much favorable conditions. So this is what I did, and then I look at it. And then it's the large data set is about over 45,000 individual loan contract, including I can go in the details, but so to see what's happened. It's my first interest in here emerging countries, which is including that. What overall they pay their spread basis points. It's quite it's positive and higher, and then 19 basis points is higher to pay their debt. Then I look at the particular year post sort of investment started, significant investment started in the 2007-8, and then I am expecting then there is something happen in would have happened in the 2009 and onwards. Then if I look at the 9, in general, it's the spread is very, very high, but for the emerging markets, they are the coefficient is negative. I can take it as a shock, these things, as the impact. Then I look at the other years as well, and then to see what happened. Over the time, as you can see, is the some 2011, 12. So is the coefficients become less and less significant, but still significant in there. Then I took the further opportunity as a second model to see the construction, just mainly investment, Chinese investment in these countries, generally constructions, construction areas. Then it's it is surprisingly they are their relation is negative. So it means they don't, since China bringing the capital, bring the money, finance in the country, then is the market value them. Market, and when these countries go back to the syndicated loan markets, which is the bit more in international, they can enjoy it. So it's the overall, what I will say, it's a good job, very interesting, but I suppose you need to further develop the papers. Might be what happened after that. These are my few of my thoughts in the here.
What a very interesting discussion, turning a qualitative paper into a quantitative one. As we see from the first paper, we see a lot of themes that can be developed. ECG, for example, okay, and climate risk. Before you leave, Doctor, I'm going to open the floor for just 2 quick questions, okay?
So I just have a question about, because you're doing this kind of qualitative analysis, is there any scope for understanding the demand side of the investment? Sort of, basically, there seems to be a lot of focus on where it's coming from and how much is coming and so on and why they, but I don't see any pull factors in this analysis. And I'm a bit curious about, whether China's decline in its investments is related to some extent in a decline in demand for investment, or whether it's actually whether their share is significantly declined in the way that we are sort of building the narrative here.
One last question.
Thank you so much for this very interesting paper. And first of all, just a quick comment on ICT. Huawei and ZTE, I know that before 2013, a lot of their capital is injected by CDB in the form of a supplier's credits, but it's a buyer's credits in essence. And then prior to 2010s, because they're private companies' nature, they were actually having access to international banking financiers. So they did a lot of projects back then. So just putting the context into, is this really a big change, or is it just a change of chasing different finance available? And the question I have in mind is, with all this rich data, and I love, just having data on this topic in general, because there are so few of them, there is a question of, so what? And I think there is a phenomenon, particularly regarding renewable energy investment, is that there is a very strong foundation in China, but unlike the hydropower or railway investments, that we see this immediate transfer export from domestic market to the international market, renewable energy investments are still not quite matching to that level, even though domestically they're actually running a surplus. There is an overcapacity. Is this a problem of finance? Is this a problem of bankability? Is this a problem of other finance issues? Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to allow another question.
Thank you very much. Looking at the trends, just an observation whether you are able to cross-check when the finance, what do you call it? The financing on the electrification process, and thankfully the access is increasing. They are also actually financing the extraction, a part of it, in a way that these are complementary. It's not just increasing energy access, but they are actually getting more to their country, that they are actually importing more of raw materials and exporting to Africa the finished goods. So there's that kind of complementarity part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any response?
Thank you for the questions. I'll try and respond as best I can. This is a paper that's gone through a fair amount of revision, so I very much appreciate your suggestions and thoughts on how to make it better and a contribution. On the demand side, I think there are certainly what we can identify as continued demand, even in the face of decline from China, and particularly, I think, if you see ICA data after 2018, even though financing from China declines, it still increases from other financiers. So there's still projects going on. There are still kind of bankable opportunities, and there's still an enduring infrastructure finance gap, right? There's a lot of infrastructure projects that are still very much part of government development strategies that are looking for financing. Whether or not they should all be constructed is another matter. But I would have to think about exactly how we measure pull factors. If you have thoughts on this, I'd very much welcome them in trying to tell that side of the story. And thank you, Kenny, for the point on ICT and suppliers credits. This is something that we chose the sector because it was an area where, it's one that is potentially less dependent on the kind of sovereign bilateral lending compared to transport and railways, for example, and potentially we saw as one that was more supportive or favorable to innovative financing structures. And I can't remember the rest of the question around bankability of projects in renewables and the so what. I guess the so what of the paper is to understand, given that China has been such an important contributor to infrastructure finance for the last 20 years, and that we are seeing this decline in overseas lending, to try and signpost at least in which directions this future evolution might go, and to draw some kind of policy lessons and to be a little bit more critical about the experiences that we've seen so far and how they might be applied not only to future Chinese construction, whether or not in frontier sectors or in other sectors, but also for international other international finances in this area.
Thank you, Dr. Chen.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Now to the last paper, Beyond State Backed Funding. And this paper will be delivered by two authors from the University of Manchester and Leiden University, Dr. Gambino and Franceschini. Did I get that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will keep the time, don't worry.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone and for the organizers as well. I'm Elisa I'm doing a postdoc at the University of Manchester, and this is Costanza, who's doing a postdoc at Leiden University. So the paper we're presenting today came up as Costanza and I met in Ghana, and we were talking about our common research on Chinese SOE internationalization, which actually took place as the decline of funding was happening. And we started discussing sort of how are then these Chinese contractors still expanding their market, although there is very little financing that is available. So in the paper, what we do is we try to frame it within the change in global geography of development. So in the context of the shift between North-South engagement and more South-South cooperation, especially trying to look at the debate on the potentialities that are associated with what is considered perhaps it has an intended notion of win-win cooperation and solidarity. However, this often doesn't really match some of the economic realities of South-South engagement as well. And in terms of empirical data, what we try to do is to look at Southern firms and how they impact the broader context in which infrastructure development takes place. But this might sound a bit different from what the discussant of the paper has read. That's because we received reviews from a journal, and so we have worked on it a bit more. So in terms of the study of SOE internationalization, what we try to do is, instead of focusing on the why do Chinese state-owned enterprises in the infrastructure sector internationalize, we try to look at how. So how are their internationalization processes, and especially in the context of declining state-backed finance. So the key argument of the paper is that initially Chinese SOE internationalization was reliant, obviously, on state financing. However, increasingly, we see that they're competing for international tenders, winning projects that are not funded by Chinese sources. And so we make a case around the importance of embeddedness of Chinese SOEs in African markets and African contexts, and how this is crucial to sustain their spatial expansion in Africa. Conceptually, we build on different understandings of embeddedness in both economic geography and economic anthropology, specifically on different iterations of the concept of embeddedness in the global production network approach. And so in the paper, we understand embeddedness as the extent to which firms, part of a network, are anchored, whether through material production or through relationships through different institutional and political economic practices. And if we specify even more, we are kind of building on Martin Hess's understanding of multiple embeddedness. So Hess sort of looks at three different types of embeddedness: societal, network, and territorial. For societal, he thinks this is the genetic code of a company, the sort of baggage that they carry with them. And when we look at it in the context of SOE internationalization in Africa, we are specifically focusing on the influence of state-business relations within China's political economy and how they have evolved over the course of 40 years of economic reforms. And we see it as manifesting in the availability or the ability to access specific incentive regimes that not only facilitate market entry and expansion, but they also allow companies to then be able to have attractive bids when it comes to non-Chinese funded projects. In terms of network embeddedness, Hess sees this as the structure of relationship amongst different actors, regardless of where they're located in the world. But in our paper, we specifically focus on firm-level trust negotiated relationships. And so we look at how Chinese SOEs are developing relationships with other multinational corporations, African actors, whether it is ministries, state and non-state actors, as well as potentially Western actors as well, or other Chinese companies. For territorial embeddedness, and this is perhaps the part that we develop further, like theoretically in the paper, we try to differentiate from some of the work that has been done, for example, by Cathy Lam on multiple embeddedness, by, yes, taking Hess's understanding of territorial embeddedness as the local manifestation of these networks and also the nodes of these global networks. But what we do, we try to think about it relationally, and especially to look at the individual and individualized strategies of company managers and leaders in seeking new projects for further market expansion. And this is the part that we perhaps draw the most from economic anthropology.
So in our paper, we focus on two CCC, China Communication Construction Companies overseas subsidiaries. So in particular, China Road and Bridge Corporation and China Harbor Engineering Companies. And in particular, we build on the case of CRBC in Kenya, where Elisa has conducted fieldwork research between 2018 and 2019, conducting in particular research on the construction of the Lamu port, but also looking at the other project implemented by CRBC in Kenya. And we also built on the case of Czech in Ghana, where I conducted fieldwork research between 2021 and 2022, looking at Chinese finance project built by Czech in Ghana, but also looking at the other project implemented by Czech in Ghana and West Africa. We both conducted fieldwork research, ethnographic research, so we both collected our data through semi-structured interviews, informal conversation, participant observation in Kenya and Ghana and even China, with Chinese and non-Chinese actors involved in these construction projects, so Chinese workers, engineers, managers, state officials, foreign consultants, foreign subcontractors, local actors, and in particular, so as said, in our paper, we focus on CRBC in Kenya and Czech in Ghana trajectories and the strategies to establish the business overseas through multiple embeddedness strategies. In particular, we understand societal embeddedness as said as the evolving state-SOAS relations vis-a-vis firm internalization processes. And if we think about Chinese state-owned contractors in Africa, in particular, we consider the centrality of Chinese finance project for Chinese SOEs. And in particular, for instance, if we look at the case of CRBC in Kenya, we can see how even if CRBC had already entered the Kenyan construction sector when Chinese funds start increasing, the company had benefited a lot from this increasing in Chinese funds to Kenya's infrastructure development. For instance, he had benefited through the possibility to implement Chinese funded projects, for instance, before 2002, with Moi's presidency, he had the opportunity to implement Chinese funded projects, but also later he had the opportunity through these Chinese finance projects to engage with multiple state and non-state actors in Kenya, and so also to assess other opportunities, also for instance, constructing a project without tendering process, so to be contracted without tendering, such as for the construction of the Nairobi Northern and Eastern bypass built by CRBC between 2009 and 2014. So in this sense, looking at the case of CRBC in Kenya and Czech in Ghana, we can see how Chinese-backed projects were crucial, both in terms of market entry for these companies, such as in the case of Czech in Ghana, but also for solidification, as in the case of CRBC in Kenya. Then, however, since, as we argue in our paper, Chinese-backed funds do not alone sustain Chinese state-owned contractors' business overseas, Chinese state-owned companies also need other embeddedness strategies to sustain a business. And for instance, we understand network embeddedness, as said, as the firm-level relations supporting SOEs internalization and market expansion. And in this case, for instance, if we look at the case of Czech in Ghana, we can see how Czech entered the Ghanaian construction sector through a Chinese-funded project in 2012. However, even if Czech arrived in Ghana in 2012, that Chinese finance project was not implemented in 2012 and was put on hold for some time. However, Ghana had entered the country, had established his office and start related with many state and non-state actors. And for instance, in 2015, Czech was contracted to build the Tema Port expansion project, the largest port in Ghana, it was contracted by both the Ghanaian Port Authority, GPHA, but also other two multinational firms, which are Bolloré Transport and Logistics and IPM Terminals. And indeed, that was not the first time that Czech was implementing a project with Bolloré and IPM Terminals, because already in 2012, Czech had built the Abidjan Port Expansion Project in Ivory Coast, where also Bolloré and IPM Terminals were involved. Since then, they were the operators of that port. And later in 2020, after Czech had finished to build both the Tema Port in Ghana and the Abidjan Port in Ivory Coast, was contracted still by Bolloré and IPM Terminals to be the second phase of Abidjan Port expansion. So if we look at the history of Czech in Ghana and Ivory Coast, we can see how Czech developed in the same period project in two different countries, interacting often with the same international firms. And so we can see as Chinese SOAS expansion as a country, and arguably also at a regional level, is often made possible by this network embeddedness, both at the local level with the politician and state actors, but also at by these business networks with multinational firms.
And when it comes to then the localized manifestations of these networks and how they play out in practice, what we do in the paper, we sort of identify three different ways that the connections that company managers and leaders have with different individuals in African governments or within these business networks are sort of manifesting into new projects that are not financed by Chinese sources. So one manifestation is getting projects off the ground. A very good example of this is the relationship between the former director of CRBC Kenya, Dufay, and a political consultant in Kenya, Wanjiji. You might have heard of him recently because he just became a politician as well. However, Wanjiji was crucial in introducing the former leader of CRBC, Dufay, to the then Ministry of Transport, and who then later signed actually the Nairobi-Mombasa SGR contract. But at that time, the network in which Dufay was embedded was mainly had to do with political consultants and people that were sort of circulating and rotating around key political figures and government officials. However, in 2012, Dufay was then transferred to Angola, and the networks of the new director of CRBC Kenya changed quite drastically and began focusing more on ministers, general secretaries of ministries, and people who were already in very sort of high-level bureaucratic positions and offices, as well as with the president and the office of the president himself. And so the changing composition of the networks and the relations between the managers and local political elites also manifested in a change in the contract and the type of railway and the way that the project had been designed. Another manifestation is the unsolicited feasibility studies. This is quite a common practice for Chinese SOEs. Anyone who does research on construction SOEs must have observed this. A very interesting case is the case of the Likoni floating bridge just south of Mombasa. So just out of Mombasa, there's a channel that could only be crossed by ferry. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the lockdown and sort of curfew regime, it had become quite a challenge. There was very violent repression for people who weren't respecting the curfew, but also the ferry was very, very crowded. So it was also a health concern. And plans for a permanent bridge had been stalled for decades. And then CRBC in May 2020 conducted an unsolicited feasibility study, brought it to the Kenya Port Authority and the Ministry of Transport, who decided to fund the project. The floating bridge was built, and then in 2023 was then set for demolition. This is obviously a practice that is quite common. We've observed it, both of us, in the two country case studies. And the fact that these networks, the sort of network embeddedness of the companies allows for territorial embeddedness to then be deployed more strategically, for example, through these unsolicited feasibility studies. One of my participants actually talked about a government state official in Kenya, talked about this practice defining Chinese SOE construction companies as sleeper cells. So he said, and I somewhat quote because I haven't memorized it exactly, he said, they may become 5 years in advance, they see what they can do, and by the time you turn around, they have a feasibility study. So the final sort of manifestation is very closely connected to these practices. This is the one of buying tenders. So there are regulations in many African construction markets whereby under a certain limit of money, of value of the project, it's earmarked for local construction companies. So in Kenya, this is a USD 500 million. And so projects below this value are earmarked for 50 million, sorry, for local construction companies. In a way to increase capacity and develop the strength of the business sector in the construction industry locally. However, it is often common for, it happens that the companies that these projects are awarded to don't have the capacity, whether it's material in terms of the machineries and at times the staff as well, to undertake the construction projects in practice. And so what happens is that they sell the projects to Chinese construction companies for a lower price. So this is not a formal subcontracting practice per se, but it is very common. However, I'd also like to specify that this is not Chinese company specific at all. I mean, for Chinese companies, we've observed it in Ghana, in Kenya, colleagues have observed it in Zambia. However, already in 2006, Giorgio Blundo was writing about similar practices with French contractors. So this is absolutely not China specific at all. So in conclusion, what we do with the analysis of the internationalization trajectories of these two CCCC contractors in these two African countries, we do point out at how non-Chinese funded projects are really crucial to their sustained market expansion, but they are mainly emerging through the interactions with different networks in which Chinese contractors are embedded. And so we make a point around multiple embeddedness as being crucial for spatial expansion and sustained market expansion of these companies. And more broadly, we hope that we are highlighting in the paper how embeddedness has become a key feature in South-South context when it comes to infrastructure development. And therefore, it's also shaping the parameters and the context in which infrastructure development takes place more broadly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now we have the discussion from Dr. Fui.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually went for a practice session to be able to pronounce your name. I hope I did a little bit okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks you for inviting me to have this discussion. And firstly, I would thank to your papers. How to pronounce your surname, Dr. Gambino, and also the Dr.
Franceschini.
Okay, I'm really pleased to have your papers. It's really interesting and insightful. And I also appreciate that the effort you put in your paper. Now, so before the comments, I would like to give the brief overview of this paper. Although you have really clearly presentation. Now, the research topic is about the funding reduction and its impact on Chinese state-owned enterprises in Africa. And the issues is that how funding reduction affects the market expansion strategies. So they use the two cases for this one. Now, the key message is that the existing literature has mainly focused on the Chinese funded and also the Chinese constructed infrastructure projects. But however, they overlooking the other forms of the market expansion. So it's really interesting. They use the sample that's CCCC, that's the overseas branches, the two companies here.
So the data based on, that's the qualitative data that's collected from the Kenya and Ghana, and also the China, almost from 2018 to the 2022. So the unique data here, I think it's really tough to get it. They use the way about such like the semi-structured interviews and also the informal conversations. So this data is amazing. Yeah. And they use the approach about the multiple embeddedness here from 3 aspects. Now, okay, now turn to the comments. That's just something that I'm really curious about. 3 comments. The first is about the case and the data. Since I know that the BIOT and the road initiative that the initiative that was initially proposed by China in 2013, and after that in 2016, that China announced a serious support for Africa. So especially for the infrastructure development, financial support, and so on. So I think the data can start from 2016, but maybe it's so tough to get it that I'm not sure whether it's available or not. And also that since I know that's not only that Kenya and Ghana, they had the project of the CCCC, but also that I know that such like those countries, they also have the project. So I think that you can include additional cases, and also you can enlarge the period, that's the time, maybe start from 2016 otherwise. And I think in this way, you can complement that qualitative research with a quantitative data. Yeah. And the second comment is that the Africa must face the spillover effect. Since we know that the investment and activities of Chinese constructions of these entrepreneurs, that they will bring about the transfer of technology and management knowledge, improving local infrastructure. So their project also creating economic spillover effect for Africa. So such like something that I think that the project will be satisfied about the local competitors, such like the resource allocation and also the capital business and as well as the labor market allocation. Maybe they will lead to uneven resource distribution and uneven resource local capital distribution, as well as they may reduce the market share of the local business. So the local business will be suffer a lot. So in this way, I think that the Chinese firms, if they want to expand their market, they may face the barrier about the local business. And also the local business will suffer about the spillover effect from the China. Third one is that the long-term development. Recently that we know that's the topic about the sustainable development that increase. So if the firm that they want to have the long-term development, I think they should focus on integration with local markets and improving the quality and sustainability of their projects. So I just think that you use a multiple embeddedness with 3 aspects. How can you just further extend to environmental embeddedness here? Just in my opinion, I think whether I think it's if we combine 4 of that embeddedness, it's good to optimize their enterprises' international strategies and also the achieving the sustainable development. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know you are eager to have your break. Okay, but to follow process, we are going to take 2 to 3 questions and a response from our presenters. Okay.
Thank you so much, Elisa and Costanza. Enjoyed the project so much. I just have two quick questions. One is, are companies that are more embedded do better in getting non-Chinese financing these days? And the second question is, qualitatively, companies, do they have different strategies of embeddedness or different types of embeddedness when they have access to Chinese financing vis-a-vis the international finance?
Yeah, don't worry.
I'm so sad today. Nobody knows.
Thank you very much. I find the paper by Gambino and Franceschini absolutely interesting. I'm interested in the embeddedness. What's the role of the political system, and especially how the transactional costs and the cost of penetrating the political system? What role does it play? For example, does it show categorically the differences between Ghana and Kenya? Would you say where the costs are higher because of the cost of accessing the political system? Thank you.
I'm going to give you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really, the same, I like the paper very much. I think you touched upon a very, the question that we have to ask in the next, maybe a few years. So now after the cutting and reducing of the state financing, Chinese state-owned enterprises are facing fierce competition, the same as other firms, either local or foreign firms. So what are the challenges are they facing in this, the so-called embeddedness? Embeddedness to me is just the localization. So how can they localize, integrate themselves with the locality? So that's a very big question. So I think you throw a stone at this stage, and that can trigger a lot of following up researches and questions. So well done.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Can we have the response from the presenters?
Yes. Yes. Should I start? Yeah, thank you so much. For the comments and for the questions as well. We're definitely going to think about some of these points raised. We did discuss a lot about what to do with the concept of embeddedness, so that definitely strikes a chord. So thank you so much. So Tianyi, for your question, I think as a general observation, companies that are more embedded, especially in terms of the territorial embeddedness, and network, they do tend to do better, both at the country level market, but also the regional market. So what Costanza was mentioning in the presentation in terms of expanding regionally, that it's also been observed with CRBC and mother company CCCC in East Africa. So that is generally something that you see also the regional market benefiting from some of these dynamics of embeddedness. I would say that they do have different strategies of embeddedness, and perhaps this connects to the second question as well, in terms of whether there's a role that the political system plays and so on. So we didn't have time to talk about it, but in the paper, we also look at companies that have failed to sort of become prominent, both in terms of becoming the go-to contractor for Chinese funded projects. And usually what happens is that they bid on the wrong candidates when it comes to elections. So there's cases where contributions to electoral campaign are a common practice, not only amongst Chinese firms, but amongst all big corporations that are operating in specific markets. Once these contributions are only made to one candidate, kind of making a bet on it, and this doesn't play out very well, then the company not only fades away from the sort of networks that allow the company to get non-Chinese funded projects, like unsolicited, for example, but also from being selected in Beijing as the go-to contractor. So in Kenya, it was China WE who slowly kind of declined out of it, and CRBC kept getting all of the Chinese funded projects, as well as the other ones as well. And similarly, there's also another company in Ghana that the same thing happened. So there's definitely like a very high transactional cost, with the cost of which is pretty much impossible to estimate or to ask, because it's impossible to ask how much did you contribute to Kenyatta's re-election campaign. That wouldn't probably go down very well in terms of the interview. However, you know, there are some practices like that are more quantifiable, like SUVs or things that you can kind of tell how much more or less they're worth, right? And finally, before Costanza jumps in, I think, yes, there's several challenges to localization. And I think now with the very fierce competition, these are only becoming like heightened. There's also a lot of competition amongst Chinese firms as well, both other SOEs, like central SOEs, but also amongst subsidiaries of the same large sort of central enterprise. There's definitely like a lot going on there. But I think the point of being embedded in the market, you have lower mobilization costs when it comes to staff, when you can reuse the same query to source materials, you can reuse the same trucks from one construction site to the other. And so the bids that you're going to put through are going to be very competitive, not just because of the slightly lower profit margins of the companies themselves, but also because you have much lower bids because of the low mobilization costs of already having the machineries. You know, maybe you have used a dredger, and moving a dredger to another continent is like one of the most expensive things, right? And so you get kind of lower costs.
Yeah, thank you.
And yes, sorry. Okay.
I will give you 1 minute.
No, yes, but no, it's fine. No, it's fine. We co-authored the paper, so we are on the same page on everything. So I just want to add just a note on the countries that we selected and the data, because I'm indeed a cultural anthropologist, so I'm playing the role of like pushing the importance of fieldwork research. So the fact that we spent more than 1 year in Ghana and Kenya, and we collected a lot of data. So that's the reason why we specified the periods in which we were indeed in Ghana, Kenya, and even China to conduct our research. But then in our paper, we really try to cover the period since Chinese state-owned companies internationalization in the late 80s and till now. So in a sort of long period, and then we zoom in the period that we when we have done research. And also, so for the case study, we really want to keep Ghana and Kenya because they are the country that we researched the most and we know very well. At the same time, obviously, we change a little bit also the focus on this South-South relation, also to say that this is a case study that we know very well. And then obviously it can apply also to other
Thanks
countries.
a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Before I let you go, I'm sure you enjoyed the session. And just to summarize, a takeaway from this session is the fact that finance and accounting is not just quantitative. Okay? Many researchers are starting to use qualitative methods to examine finance and accounting issues. In fact, studies from linguistics are now entering into accounting and finance. So this opens an opportunity for all of us to introduce qualitative research into our work and to also work with other researchers from different disciplines. Thank you very much for your presentation.